This is Jimmy.
And Scott.
And this is the Lead Domino podcast powered by MDP Lacrosse. On this podcast, we will be discussing with athletes, coaches, and other professionals what specific mental techniques they utilize to prepare, compete, and recover. These are the questions that fascinate us, and we want to hear what our guests do to be their best mentally. And hopefully, you get a little something out of these episodes to help move you forward. On today's episode, we host Zach Oliveri. Zach is a Long Island native who graduated from Connecticut High School. He played lacrosse and graduated from UMass and played a fifth year at Stony Brook. Zach is currently in grad school earning his doctorate in physical therapy. His years as an athlete and his love of health science have set him on a journey that he loves. Zach shares advice on how to manage emotions during and after competition and explains his theory on unorganized routines. Zach's hunger to learn, his tendency to help and teach and train the next generation is very inspiring. He's even a fan of neuroplasticity. To learn more about Zach, follow him on Instagram at CoachZ_SPT. That's Instagram at CoachZ as in Zach _SPT as in student physical therapist. We had a great conversation and we hope you enjoy it. Zach Oliveri, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being on this. It's awesome that you were able to do it. And I know you and I have a lot to discuss and talk about, and I'm excited because I know we have similar mindsets, and you're very well educated and into the research and stuff like that. So I'm really excited for this.
Likewise, yeah, I'm really excited. I'm just grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump in. Tell us about your background, how you started, things like that.
All right. I got a pretty crazy story. But I grew up on Long Island. My whole life, basically, from age 6, I was involved in lacrosse. Being a student athlete, and then I went to Connecticut High School, and then was so obsessed with the process of going to college and playing lacrosse in college. So then I ended up being fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to University of Massachusetts.
Nice.
Played 4 years there, and then Stony Brook for my last year to start some graduate work. And I started some graduate work towards physical therapy. And then I'm currently at New York Institute of Technology. I'm finishing up my DPT this year. So.
DPT being your doctorate of physical therapy?
Yes, my doctorate
Awesome.
of physical therapy.
Nice. Dr. Oliveri. You're getting there. Awesome.
Yeah,
So
really excited about it.
Yeah. So between your classes, becoming a doctor, which is awesome. What's your involvement with lacrosse these days?
I've been since probably around 17. My father got me involved with just working with the community, the youth programs, doing some private training, meeting some people, met some great people along the way. And ever since then, I've been coaching kids, specifically goalies, all over the island. Where I was working camps, but I've really focused mainly now with my time schedule with school and stuff, specifically on individual training and player development, sports psychology, the whole ordeal. Right now, just with goalies,
Nice.
I think it's needed, and it's been great ever since I was 17, and it's something I'm extremely grateful for.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you growing up as a goalie, did you ever have any formal training?
I had a couple people. I was the youngest of 5, so my parents were, paying for sports for everybody. So it was tough, and individual training in that time I don't think was around as much as it is now.
Yeah, it's a lot different,
especially with early sports specialization.
Sure.
So to answer your question more directly, a couple of people, nothing crazy.
Right, nothing like what it is today.
Yeah, no, definitely nothing like it is today. I got bored. My dad met a couple people and got some pointers just to kind of work on the backyard.
Sure.
And then I started playing travel lacrosse a little later than kids do now. I started playing when I was around 13.
Okay.
And I was introduced to someone that would be a future role model of mine.
Sure.
And Doc Schneider. So I started being tutored by doc, and then further on into college. So, it wasn't until the very, my late adolescent years I started to really get formal training.
Yeah.
I really tried multiple sports prior to that.
Cool. So you just mentioned something about the sports psychology end of your training. What got you into all that?
So as I progressed through my career of lacrosse, into college, college athletes, I can speak from a personal standpoint, deal with a lot of extra off the field, on the field stuff. So I went through some struggles as any athlete, as any kid would, growing up, being away from home.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of success on the field, but also dealt with a little bit of failure as well. So just kind of working through that mental aspect of my game was something I was, extremely involved in, especially at UMass. So
Yeah.
I just started really falling in love with the why to everything and how things worked, how the mind worked, and just performance in general, not just athletically. So
Yeah.
I really just fell in love with it.
Yeah. Did you have a coach or a mentor that influenced you, or was it more just kind of like self-improvement and just researching and searching, and that's kind of what you found?
I think it was a combination of just having some coaches and mentors that were so obsessed with the process of success as well, and then being just the nature of who I am, being so hard on myself. I just really came obsessed with that process, and from then on, once I started reflecting on how college lacrosse went for me and college in general, I really started to look into the research and apply it to what I'm doing now, working with kids, and hopefully my future career with working in the sports sector of rehab and performance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And at what point did you realize you wanted to become a physical therapist?
That's a tough question. I was always on and off about it. I was introduced, as most athletes have the same answer. I was introduced to injuries a lot throughout my career. So I was in the rehab room. So that was one of the reasons I saw the impact it can have.
Yep.
And then just meeting some really great physical therapists along the way that just I saw the opportunity to be able to work with many different types of people, and in my scenario, athletes. So it's just another way that I can just improve myself and help improve others.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think to your point, it's very important for some young athletes to understand that they don't need to know the answers in high school, maybe even as, young college. It's like, I'm sure you deal with a lot of athletes who are like, I don't know what I want, but they feel like they have to declare something when they're in 10th grade. And it's like, well, no. You can have a passion, you could explore it, and if it works out, awesome. But if you explore it and realize it's not for you, you can always change, right? Like that whole career path.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. And I think that's why, and I don't want to go on a whim here, but talking about how I work with my athletes, a lot of what I do is tell my story. And I hope that my story lets these kids know that there's no direct path to anything. I explain to them where I've been, what I've done to get there, the struggles that I've had, just to kind of let them know that it's not a direct path and that, it's constantly changing. Careers change left and right. And the more that you prepare for that and have different tools on your tool belt, you can, use those tools to kind of get to the end.
Yeah. And to the whole struggle, I feel like that's always a hot button issue around youth sports, because you have like the polar opposites of what people define as real struggle and what people define and tell somebody else, like, oh, what you're going through is not really struggling. And I've just found in my experience, like, if you're struggling, it's real to you, right? It's the pebble in your shoe. And as a coach or a trainer, it's not about minimizing somebody else's struggle. It's about like leading them through it. And hopefully, I mean, the majority of the time, it's really not that big of a struggle, but it is in their life. Like if you're in 7th grade and you got a huge pimple on your forehead, that's a struggle.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and that
absolutely.
could affect somebody. You know what I mean?
I,
And it
I
seems, it
love
sounds
the
like that's what you're
analogy.
getting to.
I love your analogy of pebble in the shoe.
Yeah.
And a lot of things I like to tell people that I work with, not just my athletes, is that you got to expect to struggle, and then that your struggle is your own perspective of what's going on, and
Right.
it's okay to fail, and that everyone experiences it. Just because LeBron James is as successful as he has his own struggle within his own day to day.
Correct.
And everyone has their own interpretation of struggle. Everyone has their own interpretation of failure. And I'm a big believer in it's how you respond to that moment, that struggle, that matters in the development of your own character. So,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more that it's individualized to the person.
Yeah, 100%. It really is. It really is. And it's like when you're dealing with young athletes, and I mean young athletes, even, college kids, it's like you get to a point, like adults get to a point where they feel like, it's a normal part of life and people should know how to get through it. But it's like, no, like you have to learn and it's a process. Just like, as a goalie, learning how to, save off hip. It's like, no, you need to learn and be led through a struggle. You're still going to feel it, but you got to learn. It's just a learning process like anything else.
Absolutely. It's all experience driven.
Yep.
And that's why having people like coaches, mentors, teachers to guide you along that process of learning is crucial.
Sure.
And that's, I think that is what is missing a lot in our sector of coaching and stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that don't have that ability to influence the learning and really work with the person individually and who they are and what they're
Right.
struggling with to kind of get them to that successful point.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think along with that, I think a lot of we just call them coaches, trainers, like who's ever dealing with young athletes, they don't either have the understanding or the confidence in themselves to push a kid to that threshold of like that true uncomfortable place where you and I both know that's really where the growth is. But once they're in that really true uncomfortable place, that like the way you speak to them and the way you challenge them from there is really like the gold, is the good stuff. So I feel like to your point, a lot of guys aren't comfortable teaching somebody when they're in that space because it's very tricky. To learn how to navigate it, it's very tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been uncomfortable hundreds of times throughout my career as an athlete, as a grad student.
Well, being a lacrosse goalie has to be one of the most uncomfortable things on earth. So
yeah. So exactly. Yeah. So I think it's been the
or
nature
maybe being the parent.
Maybe
being the parent of a goalie is maybe just as uncomfortable.
I could probably even more, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that is almost kind of conditioned me to be used to that. But I've been, going back to coaching, I've been in situations where I haven't known the answers for the kids when they've had questions. I've coached enough kids where some tough topics have been brought up, and that again was a struggle in myself where I have to learn. Okay, let's work with this together.
Yep.
Let's come up with a solution together, and we'll get you there.
Yeah.
And you deal with that a lot in the rehab realm as well. You talk about people doing stuff called motivational interviewing, which is a whole other topic. But getting these people to work with their struggles and just understanding what's going on about them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think for me, and I've talked about this a little bit on probably every episode I've recorded so far, but like a naive, inexperienced me, let's say, 10, 15, maybe even 5 years ago, I would be very hard on myself about like I should know all the answers. Like, and if something arose and I wasn't, I didn't know the answer. I was like, oh, geez, I should know it. And I would get pissed at myself, and it would bring out, some of those negatives. Like that was kind of the lead domino that would get a lot of the negatives to get rolling. And now, with more experience and just, I guess, maturity, if I have any maturity, that's what it comes back to. Is just like that idea of it's okay to not know, but you also can't beat yourself up when you don't know. And I find myself asking people a lot more questions, and I'm more open to just reaching out to people and talking with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing how like-minded we are. You talk about not having all the answers. I've had coaches in the past tell me you're never going to have all the answers.
Yep.
And more recently, sometimes when you're so busy stuck looking for those answers, you have to take that step back and keep things in perspective. And sometimes the answers are right in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not all the time, but sometimes
Yeah.
they are. So
yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I've done tons of things that have helped me kind of center myself and help bring myself back to the present moment to kind of help when you're all over the place trying to figure out the answers. Because as a coach, as an educator, that you're worrying about so many things all at once. So sometimes it's good to have things to help bring yourself back.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff going on. So what kind of stuff do you do that helps center you?
So,
or what works for you?
Again, I don't have a set routine
okay.
At all. I think that a lot of people get caught up, and if you do, it's fine, but I get a lot of people get caught up in having a specific routine. You hear a lot of this stuff in the media with doing X, Y, and Z, and you have to do it this way.
Yep.
But in my opinion, every day is different. And every moment's different. And I've had coaches, especially as a goaltender, again, relating it back to my athletic experience, is that if you get caught up on having a specific routine every day, meanwhile every day is going to be different, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. And I've had coaches tell me, tomorrow's a new day. You hear that with athletes all the time. Tomorrow's a new day. And so I don't really believe in routines, but there's a couple things that that I've learned along the way that I use, tools on my tool belt, for lack of a better term. I work with mindfulness. Some people know that as meditation. Mental imagery, which they kind of can work together.
Sure.
Some self-reflection. Methods. And and I spoke a little bit about unorganized routine, which is something I like to do.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So what do you mean by that?
So, like I said, I'm an unorganized individual. So that's my routine, though. That's my individual way of living. And I know this may sound a little far-fetched, but, there may be a time where, I'm going to do more of a self-reflection-based process. I do a lot of my self-reflection when I'm going for walks, or going for long drives, from the field or from school. And I think it's super important to understand who you are, and where you came from. So, and it helps kind of play into how you go about your daily day. And when you deal with struggle, you have that self-reflection to kind of go back to, all right, how did I do that last time? Or is this something new? And then I bounce around between those different methods.
Yeah.
So that's my routine, essentially, is that uncertainty, because I like to live in that area of being uncomfortable.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, like what's really sticking out to me, it sounds like it's your tool belt analogy. It would be like, all right, if you're stuck in a routine, like I'm going to show up to every job with a screwdriver. What if today's job doesn't require a screwdriver? Mm-hmm. Oh wait, I got a hammer on my belt, or I got pliers, or that. So it sounds like you're really open and hungry to learning, and then whatever's necessary for that day or for that moment, you'll be ready for it.
Yeah, I hope to. Preparation is obviously key.
Yeah.
I've had coaches talk about that all the time, and mentors and teachers. I think that really is, and I'm glad you pointed that out. And it is my tool belt.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Especially I learned while playing, and this is all in retrospect and reflecting on my playing days, is that when I was having rough couple games in a row, battling consistency, and when things weren't going right, I had to do something to shake the routine that I was in. Right? So
sure.
It's important to, if I don't like to do wall ball on Sundays after games, I may have to do that to kind of hit that reset button. And I work a lot on that analogy with my athletes.
I like that a lot.
Especially working with goalies in a specialty position.
Yeah.
They need those. I have a figurative and literal reset button. I think that is extremely important. I've come up with that along the way of my career and stuff. So that's one thing I like to do. And you can do it within your routine, or you can do it within a moment,
sure,
within a game,
yeah,
and within anything in your daily life, not just sports.
That's interesting, because I have a similar mechanism that I advise athletes, like you're in the middle of a game, like refs are on the field, scoreboard's going, fans are cheering, and you screw up. The similar mechanism that I talk about is really just having a mantra, like a one-word, I call it a one-word reset button.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it enough, you're going to screw up enough, but if you're actually practicing that mantra like you are practicing your, right to right overhand shot on the run, you screw up in a game, that mantra pops in, you reset, and it's not a denial. And I think you'll agree with this, but it's not a denial. The reset isn't deleting what happened. It's just resetting you for the moment, and then after the fact, you can go back, you can watch the film, you can talk to your coaches or whatever, and then try to get to the bottom of why you missed 5 shots in a row or whatever it is. Right?
Yeah,
I think it gets really dangerous when people talk about, like, oh, it never happened. Like, that first quarter never happened. Don't worry about it. It's denial. And the more you try to deny something, the more it's trying to break down the door and really just take over. But like that mantra, that reset, like you're talking about, it really, that's what it does. It just says, all right, it just turns the page on a new chapter, but you're going to go back to that chapter after the competition.
That's an incredible way of looking at it. And I talk about learning every day. That was awesome. Just hearing you explain that, I think that is a really good way of looking at it, with not getting caught up in that denial, but just in the moment, having that tool to kind of set you on the right track for what's being done in the moment, and then having the ability to reflect on it. I think that was a great way of looking at it. I use words. I sometimes use physical things.
Sure.
Like I used to, use the top of the lacrosse goal as a reset button.
What does that mean?
Like I would tap the top of the lacrosse goal after a goal would go in, just to kind of and envision me pressing a reset button. And that goes back to that visualization component.
So when you say, before you said a figurative and literal. So when you say literal, you mean you actually watch yourself hit a button? Is that what you meant?
Yeah. So essentially, yeah. So it's like a tangible thing, right?
Yeah.
So our body responds to these sensations, right? So sometimes, and this is, in my opinion, you need that sensation to kind of bring you back to the moment, right? Because being a goalie or being in a stressful situation at work, sometimes you get caught up in this perceived environment that's not really going on. So to kind of have that tangible thing, a reset button, whether it's a stress ball or touching the lacrosse goal for me, it kind of brought me back to the moment. And obviously you don't want to overdo it.
Sure.
But it's something that helps kind of center you in times where things kind of you're perceiving that danger when it really isn't danger. So
right.
that's more what I mean by that.
Well, like to your point, the human brain responds the same if you're being attacked by a tiger or you're anxious about the next shot, right? Because it doesn't know the difference. It just knows the emotion of anxiety or fear.
Yep.
So you're gonna have the same response to it because the brain doesn't know the difference, right? So
Yeah.
would you find yourself like did you find yourself in practice doing things like that, or was it just game day?
More in game day. There were
Okay.
days that I used some of those tools again, and I think that plays into some of my consistency issues.
Yeah.
I think, and that's me being humble enough to talk about it, is that understanding when I failed in my past experiences and be able to get myself better. So now I can apply that to myself now, where I'm at, and my kids. So there were times in practice I didn't do that, and those may have been weeks that I didn't really perform to the standard that I expected myself.
Sure.
But I think it's super important to practice those behaviors because that's how you ingrain and improve the mind to be able to perform that way, is by practicing everything, right?
Yeah.
So, and going back to some of the tactics I use, whether it's mindfulness, visualization, people think that, I'm going to do this one time and everything will be okay. No, that's something you need to practice. It's a skill that you need to have.
Yep.
You need to, develop those neural pathways in your brain of learning that new skill of mindfulness, and then stuff like that. So,
are you bringing up a little neuroplasticity?
A little bit.
Oh man,
trying to keep it.
No, I love it. No, because I think everything you're saying makes 100% sense. But it's like it's tricking your brain. Obviously, there's no reset button, but you could trick your brain into believing that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's just like anything else. You rep it, the more that belief is ingrained. It becomes more of a habit.
Absolutely.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So do you, between athletics and what you're doing now as far as the physical therapy, do you find any equivalencies in maybe those emotions we were talking about? Like you have a big game or you have a big presentation or a big test, and do you find yourself preparing in similar ways or, new different ways? Anything?
Definitely, there's definitely more different. There's times when you're doing a scholarly presentation, you kind of have to. I was more of an intense athlete, so when you're doing a presentation in front of, your professors, you kind of have to be able to reel it in.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I throughout my experience there, when I was learning at New York Tech, I had a professor that she was involved in sports, and she looked at me and she's like, I can tell you're a coach and that you were an athlete. She was giving me pointers on, that's great, and don't lose that touch, but sometimes you have to reel it in a little bit and focus on just delivering the message.
Sure.
A lot of, as opposed to a lot of movements and stuff. So it's interesting you asked that, because there's definitely some equivalencies on how I prepare and how I do things, but it's to a lesser degree, I think. You can always relate things, but sometimes, now if I'm practicing physical therapy, if I'm super intense in a moment, it may lead to a poor outcome. It really just depends on the moment. So again, having all those tools to kind of use, now relating that to my career now is a fun task, because I'm learning even more about myself.
Right.
So it's super important. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. No, because I'm sure as you go through new adventures and new experiences as a PT, you're just challenged in different ways that you've never been challenged before, right? So I'm sure you're falling back on your values, but though your values are going to be utilized a little bit differently because it's a different environment.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just really how you build upon everything that you already have, And that's
Yeah.
that's why the brain and how the brain functions is so interesting to me. It's so fascinating to me because things like that happen.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's again that self-reflection component. It's super important in just revisiting your values and where you've been.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, whether it's this podcast or doing something outside the lines of the field, I find myself preparing very similarly, but a lot of things outside the lines, you have a lot more control over things. So
Absolutely.
so you can prepare a little bit differently. Like you study for a test, and I always say something to the effect of like, well, imagine you're trying to fill out your Scantron or you're trying to write like your essay, and somebody's punching you in the arm. Like that would make that essay a lot more difficult. But we know that's just a silly analogy, but we know that if you did what you had to do and you know the information, writing out that essay is not difficult because nothing's going to change.
Yes.
You know your exam is, chapters 1 through 4. Like the textbook's not going to switch it up on you and put chapter 10 where chapter 3 is and screw you up. Like
right.
So to me it's those two opposites of, all right, I got to prepare as best I can to be a lacrosse player or an athlete. But once I step on a field, everything's going to change and everything's going to be different, basically. But if I sit in that desk and take the test, everything's going to be basically what I studied, So
right.
I think that's a common difference in preparation between something a little more academic versus something a little more athletic, a little more random and chaotic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw that early on with school after I finished playing.
Yeah.
And went to graduate school. I had the intensity, the hard work, all those principles and values that I've learned.
Yep.
But I had to learn how to sit there and know, how can I apply it to this, right?
Yeah.
And I knew if I prepared by studying what I was given and staying focused on that topic, that I will be in good shape.
Yeah.
Right? It's not academics. In the didactic coursework isn't as dynamic as an athletic environment, right? Because you know where you're going when it comes to academics.
Yep.
Right? However, once you start getting into the research realm and outside of it and
Sure.
into a field like physical therapy, that's a very they call it a gray environment where there's nothing's really black and white.
Sure.
That's where you get a lot of that flexibility in your environment, that dynamic environment of things changing. So I think
things change because you're dealing with the human brain and you're dealing with somebody else's human brain. So
exactly,
it's almost the same because you're dealing with humans. Things are going to change. They're going to change quickly, and if you don't have a handle on your foundation, things could get out of hand really quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And that's why, and that's why it's super important to have those skills to kind of use. And I'm fortunate that I've had all this experience in my life that I can now apply to where I'm going in my career and really focus me. And it's exciting and it's an exciting challenge and I'm happy about being in that uncomfortable position.
Sure.
Because that's where a lot of the learning happens.
Yeah. Now, I assume as you're studying and you're learning and you're really training to become a doctorate, big time PT, you're really learning to then teach, correct? So, do you find that fun and exciting or difficult that like I have to take this information and then I really have to apply it on somebody else, and then in order to really to like teach that person to then go home and do their own exercises and things like that?
Absolutely. I think it's very challenging, right? Because you're learning all this information, but then you have to relay it to another individual,
right?
And that's true teaching, is that ability to take something and make it into something that someone can interpret in order to better themselves.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of what we do is physical, but we also, a big part of our career, of our field is educating as physical therapists, and same thing as coaches. We're educating athletes. So that's where I think everything kind of ties in for me is to why I'm doing this, is that, I'm learning all this stuff to then teach others and just give back to all different types of communities.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely see that. And a lot of people talk about, like, even if you're, studying for a math test in high school, it's like, can you learn it and then go teach it to your friend? And if you can teach it to your friend, you probably know it and you'll probably do pretty good on your test.
Right? Yeah, no, absolutely. We talk about that all the time in school, and I've worked with an incredible cohort at New York Tech of just really intelligent people, and just working together and learning. Again, a lot of that teamwork stuff I learned as an athlete. Now working with other people,
sure,
with the same goal in mind to being physical therapists, and then teaching each other, and that's the best. That's where learning occurs. Is not really when someone's presenting something to you. It's when they present it to you and you go and run with it later on, whether you're talking to somebody or reflecting on it on your own.
Yeah.
That's where that learning occurs, and that can be related to sport as well.
Yep.
Because when you learn something, your brain is constantly learning that after the environment and after the moment is over. Yep. Your brain is working, overtime,
right,
to create those circuits in your brain to kind of, ingrain that skill. So again, everything ties in together, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always found that training the individual, like, once I get a phone call from him or her and they're like excited and they're trying to tell me what they just figured out, but it's really what we've been working on for the past X amount of, training sessions, but something clicked and it's like they're teaching me. And every time I get that call, I'm like, done. They got it. Like whatever level they're at, I'm like, that's it. They got it. Because now they feel like they created it, and it's opened up that level of ownership where now they actually believe that they own those skills, and it's that moment that wow, I got it. Like they figured it out,
Yeah, that's a special moment. I'm sure you experienced that much more in your career, and I'm still experiencing it, but it's incredible. And when you finally can almost touch that ownership, right, that the athlete's expressing, is pretty special. And seeing the commitment come out is incredible.
Yeah.
And it's it's still young for me, but when it happens, it's pretty special. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, a lot of people laugh at me because I'll be training a kid, and in whatever context it comes up, like more training, or can we do extra hours, or whatever, and I'm just like, you got to do it on your own. Mm-hmm. Like you gotta do things on your own, and trust me, going to clinics, getting training, playing on club teams, all that's good. All of it's good, but in my opinion, it's worthless if you're not doing it on your own, because now you step into a game and now you're just trying to recreate what Coach Zach taught me and what Coach Jimmy taught me and what Coach Billy taught me and all these different people, but nothing's your own. So you're really not going to get the results you think you're going to get. Right? And that's like one of the biggest pieces of advice I give all these kids and all these parents. Like, it's good. If you have the resources and the time and all that good stuff, do what you can. But it's really not going to work that much if you're not doing things on your own.
Yeah, and that's an incredible point, and it's something so simple, and you hear thrown around a lot, but no one really acts on it, and to know coaches that are actually, urging parents and athletes to get involved is something awesome, and that's again that can be related to what I'm going to end up doing in my career.
Yep.
You want people to express that ownership, and one thing that I've realized over the past month or so is how important that is, because I'm actually, I had to incorporate with the current health situation in the country, in the world.
Yeah.
I had to incorporate some online training. Right.
Wow.
So now it was like a test for me, but also for my athletes to say, hey, what can you do on your own? Are you going to do this? Right. And it helps create some of that ownership. So it is, I think it's extremely important to kind of guide these kids along the way, right? Because that's what that really is getting them to understand the process of what it takes to be successful. And then you hope that those values kind of can be translated, in the future, whether it's athletics or their career or anything. So it's just understanding those basic principles, and ownership is definitely one of them.
Yeah. And I think, like, growing up with all the exposure to the internet and social media, as good as it is, and I believe in it, and I'm a big fan of it. But if you're a young athlete and you're struggling and you're behind what you consider, your peer, like the level of your peers, it's a little intimidating to just watch highlights and, the best players in the world all the time. But you got to get out there and just work and be willing to not be good at something at first. Just like the idea, like the first one's probably going to be awful, but your 100th rep is going to be much better.
Absolutely.
So you got to be in that mindset of just sticking it out. It's probably like this podcast. Not this episode, but just me doing this podcast so early on. I could probably look back. Hopefully, I'll be in a position I look back and be like, I've come a long way.
Yeah, it's extremely important. To these athletes.
So along with, and I love that. I love that reset button that you actually saw yourself hitting a reset button. That's awesome. But was there anything, or does anything stick out that you either do now or you did, as a collegiate goalie after? What would you do after?
After playing?
Yeah, after a game. In your dorm room, on the bus ride back, or after a practice, tough practice. Is there anything you did to decompress, to used for mental and emotional recovery?
Yeah, so and I didn't really start to experience. I didn't know it was in the moment, but it was once I finished, I realized it was happening. Is you have this mental fatigue as an athlete, and I noticed it as a goalie because we are, as goalies, and this is again, so I really know. As an athlete, is being in a specialty position like goalie, we're so, our mind is on overdrive throughout a game. And we are constantly managing our states of focus, of intensity. And that can be applied to any athlete, but this is just from my perspective. So at the end of games, I'd be so mentally drained. So things that thinking about it, things that I did, I tried not to think about the game. As hard as it was. So a lot of things, a lot of the times when I was in college, we had team tailgates, and I tried to just socialize with my parents. Seeing my parents after games, or seeing my teammates, and just kind of messing around and joking around. That kind of helps you kind of bring you back to the things that are important. Because in the end, sports is great and it gets you to where you need to be, but there's bigger pictures to everything. So kind of bring yourself back to the things that are important to you outside of the sport, whether it's your relationships, your family members. You don't realize it then, but people are texting you saying the game went great, and just having a quick conversation with them, kept touching up with them. I think stuff like that is really what I did.
That makes sense. It makes sense.
And then really important is, and some people aren't going to like to hear this, but is getting sleep after a game. And that's another topic in itself with performance and training and stuff, but really making sure you're resting. I would sometimes on the bus rides home take a nap and just kind of let my brain start to recover, because it's a long process.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And for people listening, not doing something is something. So that's really good advice about just like step away, just shut it down for a little bit, walk away, and then when you're fresh, recovered, then you go back, watch the film, or really dive deep into it and start to prepare for the next week. So
Yeah,
I
and,
get
and
it.
and I was never perfect at it. There were times I didn't do that, and this is all just from self-reflection
Yep.
and looking back at it and things that worked and things that didn't work.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. So, I mean, that's all like really, really good advice, strong advice. I'm sure the kids you work with are definitely fortunate to have that perspective. And I'm sure they learn a lot. But so tell us a little bit about your training company.
Yeah,
What's the name of it?
I've been doing it for years now, for almost a decade,
Okay.
and I'm slowly starting to get things rolling now that my career is starting to get going. So,
Yeah.
and I do specifically goalies, but I can reach out to other travel teams, and I've worked with their goalies, and I'm really more focused on reaching all different types of athletes. Not just goalies. Just working with them on basic skill development, can help them with some rehab in the future once I'm done with school.
Nice, yeah.
Sports psychology. That's my end goal.
Okay.
But for right now, I'm really focused on the lacrosse performance stuff. All lacrosse players, with an emphasis on goalies.
Sure.
And then down the road, hopefully, doing some stuff, rehab stuff, education, coaching education, you name it.
Yeah, I love it.
There's a lot coming down the pike that I'm really excited about.
That's awesome.
Just really looking forward to kind of getting that up and running in the next couple of months.
Yeah, great. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so right now, best place to find me is on Instagram. My handle is at Coach Z _SPT. It's just my credentials for being a student physical therapist at the moment.
It's going to change soon.
Come July. So I figured I wanted to create this account just to kind of start to spread my knowledge, reach out to communities, interact with people like yourself, and really just overall grow the game, and educate people as a whole. So again,
awesome.
You can find me at Coach Z _SPT, and a lot of my focus there is education on athletics, athletic performance, lacrosse, and then rehab coming in the near future. So that's where I'm focusing.
Yeah, guys, give him a follow. He's got great perspective, really good posts, very a lot of intense stuff that'll really help you out. So hopefully we get a part 2, because I know you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours. So next time, we'll be talking with Dr. Oliveri. Excited about that. But I really appreciate you being on today. It was a really good time. Learned a lot, and best of luck with everything.
Thanks, Jay. I really appreciate it. Again, it's great what you're doing, and it's really important. So I'm happy to be a part of it, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Awesome. Talk soon, bud.
Take care.
See you.